In our last lesson, we learned about multiplying fractions with whole numbers, but in this lesson, we're going to learn about multiplying fractions with other fractions. First, I want to go over a few key points for what it means to multiply fractions. First, we should all know that fractions are parts of a whole, which means they're less than 1. The second thing is, when we multiply fractions with other fractions, it means we will end up with a fraction of a fraction. And when we have a fraction of a fraction, that's going to result in a much smaller product. So think about taking a piece of a piece. You are going to end up with a smaller piece than what you started with. Here's an example of a fraction multiplied by a fraction using pictures. We're going to start with the problem 1/4 times 1/3. And the first fraction that we see is 1/4. So I'm going to go ahead and I made 1/4 shaded in of my rectangle. Now when we multiply that with 1/3, that means we're saying 1/4 of 1/3 or 1/3 of 1/4. So we're getting a fraction of a fraction that's already there. And let's look at how this is going to work out. So now I've divided my fourths into thirds, and I'm going to shade in 1/3 of this rectangle. I already shaded in the 1/4 when I had it just divided into fourths. Now I'm going to shade in 1/3, and we're going to see what happens. So 1/3 is this whole bar going across the top. Now, the answer to 1/3 times 1/4 is where the two sections overlap, which would be right here. And our total number of parts isn't thirds or fourths anymore. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 parts. So 12 is now our denominator because when we divided it into fourths, then when we divided it into thirds, we ended up with 12 parts. And where they overlap, we have 1/12 that overlaps with the 1/4 times 1/3. So notice when we multiply a fraction 1/4 times 1/3, another fraction, we end up with a much smaller part of a whole. Now the pictures aren't really necessary to use to solve every problem, but I did want you to see why we get such a small fraction when we multiply two fractions together by using a picture. So right now I'm going to show you how to do the same problem, but we're not going to use a picture. So I'm going to write out 1/4 times 1/3. And this is a lot like when we multiplied fractions with whole numbers in the other video homework. We just multiplied the numerators together first, and we get 1 times 1 equals 1. And then we multiply the denominators together. 4 times 3 is 12. So when we multiply the numerators and the denominators, we get 1/12. In a lot of cases, you're going to need to simplify, but since our numerator is 1, we'd have nothing to simplify in this. So 1/12 is our final answer. Now there are two strategies for multiplying fractions. We can multiply before simplifying, which means we multiply the numerator, then we multiply the denominator, and then we simplify a fraction. Or we can simplify before multiplying, which means we take our fractions that we start with, simplify, and then we multiply. And when we do that, after we multiply, we'll end up with a fraction already in simplest form. And I'm going to go over the two ways of how to do that now. We're going to do the following problem two different ways. The first way I'm going to show you is to multiply before you simplify. So we're just going to do it how I showed you in the first example where we multiplied the numerators first. So we'll multiply 3 times 5 to get 15, and then we'll multiply 4 times 6 to get 24. Now, I know that 15 and 24 are both divisible by 3, so the GCF is 3. We can also find out the GCF by using prime factorization for those of you who need a reminder of how to do that. 15 can be broken up into 3 times 5, and both of those are prime numbers. 24 can be broken up into 3 times 8. 3 is prime, but 8 can be broken up into 2 times 4. 2 is prime, but 4 can be broken up into 2 times 2. So then we make our t-chart. And 15 has 3 times 5. And 24 has 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And since 3 is the only thing that they share, 3 is the GCF. So that means we divide both the numerator and denominator by 3. 15 divided by 3 is 5, and 24 divided by 3 is 8. So this is how we simplify after we multiply. The next strategy I'm going to show you is to simplify before we multiply. And this is a little more complicated, and this is for those of you who are really good with your multiplication facts. We have to look diagonally to find greatest common factors. So that means I'm going to look at the 3 and the 6. And I'm also going to look at the 4 paired up with the 5. And what I can do is I can look to see, do the 3 and the 6 share any factors? I know that 3 can go into 6, so we can divide both the 3 and the 6 by 3. And again, this only works for diagonals. So we can divide the 3 divided by 3, and we're going to do the 6 divided by 3. 4 and 5 don't share any factors, so the 4 and 5 are going to stay the same. And let's go ahead and find our answer for the 3 divided by 3, and we will get 1. So the new numerator there is 1. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So the new denominator instead of 6 is 2. So I'm just going to rewrite this down here to make it a little nicer. Instead of 3 as the numerator, we divided it by 3, and now we have 1. But the 4 stayed the same. 5 stayed the same because the 5 and the 4, as diagonals, did not share any factors. The 6, once we divided it by 3, became a 2. And you might notice that this is an improper fraction, but I will tell you that that is okay. Now we have simplified our fractions before we multiplied, so we can go ahead and use our multiplying of fractions steps. Multiply the numerators first. 5 times 1 is 5. And then we multiply our denominators. 4 times 2 is 8. Now in this case, we don't have to do any simplifying after we multiplied because we did it before. So when you're working on your independent practice problems, you can do whichever strategy you're more comfortable with. You can either multiply first and simplify afterwards, or you can do this, what we just did, and simplify your fractions first and then multiply to get a fraction already in simplest form. Now I want you to try these 3 independent practice problems on your own. You can use any strategy that you want, but remember, you don't need to draw the pictures on these 3. The first problem is 3/4 times 4/9. Number 2 is 5/6 times 9/10. And number 3 is 3/5 times 2/7.